My name is Dave Hollenbach, the host of From Embers to Excellence, a podcast that explores the many facets of leadership from the perspectives of some amazing people. We discuss the triumphs and failures that have shaped our lives and our leadership philosophies. I've found that it isn't whether we fail that defines us, but when we do fail, how we respond. Leaders dust off the ashes and use their failures as fuel to work harder and as lessons to come back wiser and stronger, more resilient, more determined, and more committed to excellence.
Today, I'm speaking with Lisa Marie Platske. She is an award-winning certified master coach, leadership expert, speaker, and international best-selling author. She's been recognized by the White House and the Small Business Administration. Her mission is to transform lives through leadership by teaching mission-driven and service-based entrepreneurs, consultants, and corporate leaders how to live out their big mission in the world. So she's written, like, one of the really amazing things. I was going through your website and I was expecting to find, a couple of books, but you've written 6 books, probably more than that, but you've got 6 on your website and all the different publications you've been in and just major organizations that have enlisted your expertise. It blew my mind. I was really excited when you agreed to come on the show and share some of your wisdom and some of your experiences. So thank you so much, Lisa.
Thanks, Dave. I'm so excited to be here. I did the same thing. I did my homework on you and was like, wow, this is a pretty cool guy. So I want to be here and get to spend some time with you and your audience. So thanks for having me.
I always like to start off where it all began and really get a sense of your background and what really helped you develop into who you are. So where were you born and raised, and what did your family do when you were growing up?
I love that question because I believe that our families do shape us. And I was born and raised in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is a sort of a medium-sized town in Pennsylvania. My major influencers were my grandparents because my mom and dad, my dad left when I was 6. And, back then growing up, divorce was not very common. And so him leaving, it was a really big deal. There were kids in the neighborhood that weren't allowed to play with my sister and I because they were concerned, their families were concerned that divorce was contagious. I mean, literally, there was just such misunderstandings about it. Today, it seems like people have conversations, it seems like a natural. And yet back then, that was just so rare. And that meant being raised by a single mom who relied very heavily on my grandparents. So they had such an influential role in my upbringing. And my grandfather saw me like nobody else. Like, he really saw, I was watching an episode of Merv Griffin growing up, and he said, Lisa, you're going to be just like that guest. Someday you're going to speak to thousands of people. And I was like, what is he talking about? But my grandfather had this amazing ability to see people and see what they were doing. So I really treasure every moment that I had with him growing up. And my grandmother, on the other hand, was, provided this grounding, this sense of grounding in the family. My mom, in shaping me, gave me tools of resilience and tools of, it's not the life that she had planned for herself. I watched her work really hard. So that shaped me to take a stand for myself. It shaped me to be wildly independent. It shaped me in that my mom was always involved in organizations and volunteering and giving her time, even though she didn't have the financial resources. And so, that shaped me in wanting to be of service. And, while my father wasn't around and 17 was the last time I talked to him. And my dad did serve time, did go to prison at some point. What I would say is what he gave me in all of that is, I think people do the best they can with what they have. And with the tools that my dad had in his toolbox, he did the best that he could. And him leaving, I think he did it because he knew that we deserved better. It didn't make it easy. And growing up with 6 sets of step parents as a kid wasn't easy. And my mom's, my with 6 sets of step parents, there was domestic violence. There was, it was not easy. But I also attribute that to me having the compassion and the empathy and the gifts that I have today. So it taught me to not be afraid of hardship.
One of the things that you just said about your father, like so many people that I know that have a similar story struggle with saying anything nice about that parent that left. And being able to say, they did the best that they could with the tools that they had, I think that's a hard place to get to, but it allows you to have a freedom that you didn't have before. And I don't want to go too far this way because I have this other question. What did your grandfather do for a living?
My grandfather was not a highly educated man. My grandfather went to 8th grade, and that was the maximum amount of education that he had. And he was he had the belief that women should get married and have babies, and that's it. And my grandfather worked 3 jobs. He worked at a meat packing plant. He was a bartender. And he did odd jobs, and people loved my grandfather. Like he was really gave me amazing work ethic. And my grandfather also saw women as being less valuable than men. And so he really wanted grandsons. He did not want granddaughters. So I thought that like every kid who was little, went out on rainy days and put on their things to dig worms, because that's what I did as a kid, when we were little, so that he could go fishing. Like I didn't know that that was not typically the thing that most little girls do. But my grandfather so valued the hierarchy with men at the top. So the jobs that he had at the meatpacking plant and bartender, were guy jobs, if you will.
You went to school, you graduated from high school, and did you go into college, or did you go for the law enforcement job right out of high school?
No, I went to college, and that's really fabulous because I wasn't going to apply to college. Nobody in my family was college educated. It wasn't something that was, my dad was a machinist. My mom was a nurse, and it was not encouraged to go to college. And it was actually one of my friends in high school that was like, well, are you gonna go get a job then? And I was like, oh, you mean like the choice is like go to school some more or get a job? And I'm pretty good in school, so I think I'll try that, to do more school stuff. But since my family didn't have that, that background, there was actually an article in the newspaper, a small little article, and it said like, how to apply for college. And so my mom and I went to these 4 they were free things that the newspaper put on. Back then there wasn't the internet. You didn't have the internet. You went to the library to do things, or you read the newspaper. And so the newspaper came out and it said, these courses, these informational sessions would be to teach you how to fill out a college application if you wanted to go to college, what you had to do, what the steps were. It was 4 weeks for an hour and a half, like on Tuesday night or something like that. And so my mom took me over there to do that. And we sat through the classes and we learned. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I mean, it was money. You had to send in an application fee. And, we were, living paycheck to paycheck, and my dad didn't contribute child support. And this was a really big deal to send out a check for $35. It was like, this is a lot of money to apply for these colleges. You have to be very discerning. And the truth is, the reason why I did it was because the idea of getting a job for me was like so unappealing that I wanted to continue the school journey.
That's pretty funny. But
Uh,
but then you went into a really tough career field, like where you really had to work. So tell me about that.
well, but you know what, Dave? The thing about it was, I didn't. The saying "ignorance is bliss" is true, because I went into law enforcement because I went into first off, I majored in criminal justice because as a kid, the police came, they were the good guys. They came and saved the day. When things were ugly and I called the police for domestic violence, who came to save my mom from getting beaten up, and who saved us and pulled us from that situation were the police. The police were the good guys. The police were the superheroes in the story, if you will. So for me, the idea of law enforcement and criminal justice was appealing. And the other thing was, there was something for me about proving myself worthy in a man's world, because my grandfather and everybody did not have the belief that women could do the things that men can, that I was like, I'll be darned. So I majored in criminal justice because some guy that was the son of one of my mom's friends said he majored in criminal justice, and I thought I could do that. I mean, like literally, it wasn't like this, I'm going to go and put a uniform on. So when you say like you went and did something hard, the only thing I knew about criminal justice was mostly guys do it. And oh, by the way, on TV, we've got this show called Charlie's Angels, and they get to do really cool stuff. Like, I had no idea of like the hard work it would take, the amounts of mental stress that you put yourself through, the physical components of it at the academy. And when I got out of the academy and they gave me this badge that had words like, "This officer possesses integrity," I was like, wow, I do. Like, it was this eye-opening thing, and then they packed a gun home with me, and I'm going, oh my gosh, this stuff's getting real. Like, I'm literally going to be in the blue uniform with the gun, like going to work. I did not have enough consciousness at the time in my 20s to think all of those things out. Like, some people go into law enforcement and they go, yeah, like this is this is what I want to do, and it's noble, and it's a profession that I love, and I've been dreaming about this since I'm 6 years old. That was not me. It was I'm going to do something that people say that I can't do, and I'm going to do it really well. Just watch me. But I didn't really understand, when I'm putting on that uniform, oh my gosh, I'm risking my life. So that didn't come until later.
Now, how old were you when you got hired on with your first agency?
Well, that actually was interesting because there was a hiring freeze. I put in for a job, and then I was supposed to get hired, and then they sent me a letter and said, oh, well, there's a hiring freeze, like you're hired, but you're really not, like you're not going. So it was 25 when and thank heavens it was 25, because I don't think, at 22 or 23 or 24, I think it was better that it was later on. So that was my first stepping in to law enforcement.
So what did you do in that lapse of time?
I worked in banking. I got a job in banking, and I was waiting, and I didn't know it was going to be 3 years. I didn't know how long it was going to be. I got out of college and it was like, okay, now what am I going to do? And I also applied for other jobs. I had shared with you when we spoke earlier that I applied for a local probation department. And in that, I got to experience, firsthand my first experience with sexual harassment, which was fascinating, as a 22-year-old who really didn't know what she was experiencing. And so banking was something that I had done when I went home in the summertime. Um, it, I will tell you that when I got the letter to move into law enforcement, I almost didn't take it. Like, there was this piece about the level of comfort. You know, you have a job, you know what you're doing, you're making money, and then it was like, no, this is my dream, like to go into law enforcement. But that was so foreign and scary, and it would require me leaving my small town and the area to move into, in air quotes, you know, the big city, working in Newark, because I had gotten hired in Newark, New Jersey, and Manhattan. So you're moving from this Pennsylvania mid-sized town to a place where you have 4-lane highways, is I guess the best way you can just, that I can explain it to you. And and that was really scary.
Earlier, you mentioned that you moved up rather quickly.
I did.
And I'm wondering, well, can you give me the pros and cons of that? And then maybe what you attribute that rapid ascension to? Was it your mentors or just your willpower?
Well, that's I don't know that I've ever been asked that. Like, what was it? Like, what was that thing? I will tell you that for me, I've always been fascinated with leadership. And so how do people ascend? Like, how do they get where they're at? Like, how do they not stay in the same position over, and do the same job over and over and over again? I've always just been curious about that. And so I remember when I first took the job, before I went to the academy, like, I would say it was probably it might have even been day number 1 on the job. I got hired with 3 guys, and they had us in this meeting with the person who would have been, like, I guess if you were to say, it would have been my boss's boss, might have been like my boss's boss's, boss would be kind of be like the layer of where this person would have been, in the agency, because the agency was, the Newark, New York area was just a very large area. And so since they had several thousand employees, you had multiple levels, multiple layers, where if you were in a smaller area, you wouldn't necessarily have that. You wouldn't have had it necessarily in a Philadelphia, even though Philadelphia seems like a large city. The Newark, New York area was just much larger. So I remember sitting that first day, and they asked if we have questions, because it's your first day on the job, and you're, with this person who's like a superior, and is sitting there in the suit. They are no longer in uniform because of the position that they're in, and they're sitting there in the suit. And I don't even remember the gentleman's name. I just remember him asking, like, what questions. And as we went around, one of the guys asked a question about time off, and another guy asked a question about benefits, and somebody asked a question about something else with the academy, because we were getting ready to go to the academy later in the week. And I didn't say anything. And that's typically my MO in leadership, is that let other people talk, be curious, and there'll be a time for you to be able to speak. And I find that so often when someone has something that they want to say, they don't pause. They're not willing to wait and pause and see what else is there. And so I was just taking it all in. I was taking the whole experience in. And so he then turned to me and said, "Don't you have any questions?" And I said, "I do." And I said, "My question is, how long has it taken you to get to where you're at right now?" Because I wanted to know how long it took him to be in that position, in that seat. And he said to me, 17 years. And I said to myself, not out loud, but to myself, there ain't no way it's going to take me 17 years to be in that position. Like, that's exactly how I felt. It was like, I'm here, and I'm going to be here in order to be able to advance. And so what I understand about life is that life is connection, connection of people. That's one of the things my grandfather taught me. And so, at 80, my grandfather had standing room at his funeral because he was so beloved in so many communities, in a golf community, in a drinking community, in a, in so many different ways. And so life is about people. It's about connection. It's our humanity. It's our, even in law enforcement, like everything is about connection. And so for me, learning and serving and going above and beyond, and that was all important. And so I did get involved. And when you ask the question, to circle back to like, what did it take and how did you get there? Number one, I was really clear that I was going to get promoted quickly. Like I was really clear that that was what I wanted. And number two, I recognized that when the guys didn't like me and I didn't get rewarded, which was like a big surprise for me, because as being the A student and used to getting what I wanted, these guys did not like me. I was hair and nails. I had long blonde hair, I had red, white, and blue nails. I was law enforcement Barbie to them, and they did not see me as an equal or a peer. That I signed up for a leadership development program. I put myself through it. I had to write all these essays to do it. It was outside the agency, because I knew that I was failing. I knew the guys didn't love working for me, and I had to figure out what to do, what to navigate. I learned that because they didn't value me, part of it is because they didn't understand me. And so I started to get curious with the guys. I started sharing parts of me that I didn't normally share. I started learning about them. I started sharing like one of the things is, God is important to me. I started talking about that. I got curious about what's important to them. And one of the other things that I did was I stopped trying so hard to prove that I was perfect. And one of the things about a danger of being a woman in law enforcement is that because guys are looking at you, and some of them for you to fail, I worked really hard for them to never see a crack in the armor. And the danger to that is you then become inhuman. And so I became vulnerable. And instead of, I expanded my vocabulary, and I learned 3 new words. I don't know. And, in doing that, it allowed there to be a connection to the guys I was working with. And so I think that allowed the promotion to be possible. And then the connection to myself and my own voice. So probably a longer answer than you wanted, but that's really the trajectory of what happened.
No, that wasn't a longer answer. That was a really awesome answer.
Thanks, Dave.
To be able to hear your experience and how you were able to navigate being in a leadership role in a male-dominated organization, especially a bunch of men that didn't think you deserved to be there, and then being able to be successful in that role. What it took, and what you're just saying about the communication part of it, and connecting with them, learning what they valued, so that, because I think this is about like servant leadership, being that leader that can help other people develop and become successful themselves. And you being able to do that, it's just so powerful. And I don't think many people recognize that early on in their career, just how powerful that is. You're a living testament to that.
So I don't know that I recognized how powerful it was early on. Like, I don't know that I really understood that. I made lots of mistakes, Dave. Like I didn't ask enough questions early on, and I didn't position myself as, once again, I positioned myself as being perfect, right? And that's not helpful. And then, there's times when I positioned myself as not knowing anything, and sort of swinging the pendulum back and forth to figure that out. And you and I have had conversations about emotional intelligence, outside of the interview. And I feel that there's not enough given. Like one of the things in our agency is that we don't give leadership training until people have already become leaders, like meaning in terms of a title. We
Yeah.
don't give it at the academy because we assume people don't need it until they actually have the title. And what I recognized was that when I got promoted and they sent me to 2 weeks of supervisory leadership training, that there were so many things that I didn't know that would have been helpful early on in my career. And I was getting it being the fastest promoted officer. What about the people who had spent 20 years on the job and had never gotten any of it? How is that doing it's a disservice. So I made so many mistakes that I had a choice to either learn more, meaning like read more books, find out more, do better, so that I could win, which is my goal in life. Like, how do I become the best version of who I'm called to be each and every single day? In me being on that journey meant I went and had to find things out on my own because they didn't give it to me. They didn't tell me that it was something that I needed, and I didn't even know that I was missing it. And so, the awareness and those elements to be promoted, I didn't even know that. I remember when they promoted me, my area director called me in separately. There were two other gentlemen that were promoted at the same time. Like I say, there were several thousand people of us that worked in the New York area. And I was promoted. I was being sent to an office that had guys that had 37 years on the job. I had 4 at the time, and they had applied for the job and didn't get it. 30 years on the job. These were senior officers that they were sending me to work with and to supervise. And instead of she brought me in with the other 2 guys that she promoted, and then she dismissed them and she kept me there, and she asked me a question and she said, "Are you ready for this?" And I said, "I hope so," or "I think so." I said something like that. And she said, "That's not the answer I'm looking for." She said, "You damn well better be ready for this." And I was like, my eyes got really big and I went, "Oh my gosh," much like going to the academy, like the stuff's gotten real here. Like, we're going into it. Like, this is not just cavalier. Like, hey, you got promoted and they're going to give you more money. And now you got a title and you get another little bar on your uniform. Oh, no, no. Like, these people are going to eat you up. Like, they do not want you to succeed. So it was an eye-opening experience, being in all of that. And I think that when humans know each other, like when there's the connection, then you want somebody to succeed. But if you're the person who come in and is taking the job that they wanted, no, they don't want you to succeed. And not from a place that they're mean or not, not good people, but just the humanity of I don't know, and like, what in the world could this person possibly have with 4 years of experience? So I don't know that I knew all of those things. And I was a terrible supervisor early on. I just didn't have the background, the experience of I didn't know what I didn't know, that I needed to learn. But the leadership piece is the reason why I ended up being so successful in my career, like, long term.
I feel like that is a double-edged sword, for especially in, public safety, the moving up quickly, because it's hard to earn respect that you should have already earned in the eyes of the people that you're leading.
Yes, I do.
So, well, I'm curious. You then went on to further your education. Was that while you were still within the agency?
Yes.
And
Yes.
and what was that additional education that you received?
Well, I was on a money team, an outbound team, which was looking for large shipments of money coming into the country in exchange for the drugs that went out. And so I was on this team, and I'm like, I think that I need to go back to school and get my master's degree. And I didn't know what it would be for. I just knew that once again, leadership and advancement, and if you're going to move on, and the guys were like, someday you'll be the assistant commissioner. And so with that idea, it was like, well, you want the education. And so the New Jersey State Police had a program through Seton Hall University that you could go and get your master's degree at nighttime, because in law enforcement, much I'm sure like fire, you don't have regular schedules. So it's not like you can attend classes in the same way that other people can. So they literally brought the instructors and the whole staff from Seton Hall to our organization, and not to our, it was like there were different police organizations that could attend classes, and then they were delivered there, and you didn't have the same attendance requirements. And they knew that if you were in the middle of class and you got a call and you had to leave, well, then you had to leave. And so they were very understanding. And so I was like, I'm going to do this. Now, meanwhile, I'm not promoted yet, and I talk my partner, I don't know if I talk him into it. I kind of talk him into it. And I'm like, you should do this with me. So, and he says, my wife will kill me. He's like, she still hasn't finished her degree. And I'm going to go back and say, like, I'm going to go do this. And I'm like, you should do it. We should do this together. And so, I ended up going back to school for my master's, but through a very different kind of program. And I got it in human resources training and development with a certification in leadership. And I did a thesis in mentorship, formal versus informal mentorship. And it's for all of the reasons that we've talked about. Was I just wanted to learn, how do I become better at the work that I'm doing? Like, how do I become the best at what I'm doing? And I learned so much about myself in that process. The really sort of devastating thing is that one of the instructors and the person who was my biggest mentor in that season of life is somebody who lost his life in 9/11. My mentor, Tony. And I learned so much from him in that season that then I had gotten promoted, and I would not have been successful early on without his mentorship and without that experience of the education. But I can't really say it was like I ever said to myself, I'm going to get my master's degree someday. It was more looking at, who do you need to be, which is it's what I tell clients nowadays in my leadership coaching company. Like, who do you need to be? If you want that opportunity, who do you need to be to get it? And a lot of times people look at, I think, the qualifications rather than like who they need to be. Like, what do you need to let go of? How do you have to change your mind, change your brain, rewire your thinking around something? And so that program had given me the opportunity to do that.
Was there like a turning point or something that happened in your life that led you to say, you know what, I'm done with this law enforcement stuff. I'm going to go this way? Or was it a gradual move?
It's a great question. So no, when I would be at work, the guys would say to me regularly, you don't belong here. Like, you should go work somewhere else. And I'm like, what are they talking about? Like, I so belong here. Like, I love this work and I love what we do. And we stand for something, and this is meaningful. And for anybody who is an independent free thinker and has had to work in a government organization, they understand that also there's almost like why do we do it this way? That doesn't make any sense. Why do we do it this way? That doesn't make any sense. Like, when you're an independent free thinker and you see different avenues, you also are going to come up against people who say, this is the only way we do it. This is the way we do it. This is the way we've always done it. Keep doing it that way, but it doesn't work. That's okay. We still do it this way. Okay. And so there was this part of me that was becoming increasingly like, that's interesting. So I just doubled down on the leadership part. And in getting involved in leadership, I reached out to people in headquarters. I went to things like the Women in Federal Law Enforcement conferences, and I would apply for things that involved leadership because I wanted different perspectives, why stuff got done. And so when you ask, like, was there this switch that said, now go and open your own business, or now go and do this? It wasn't that. There was a gradual, like, um, interest. And so several, I want to say this was 2000, I was invited to attend to train the trainer, mostly senior leaders. It was only myself and one other person that were like first line supervisors, and everyone else had what I would call, mid-level senior leadership. And I was invited to help with the training and the curriculum at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, because what they found is that the instructors that were down there that were full-time instructors had not spent time in the field in a while, and so they couldn't share what the differences were. They could apply it in book text, but not like when you actually show up, what happens. So we were in the process of in conversation there, and then 9/11 happened, and so that changed my assignment, that changed what I was doing. But when I was at that training, they seated me alphabetically next to a man whose last name was Platske. My last name was Polanski. I don't hyphenate because I'd be Lisa Marie Platske, and that's like way too much for anybody to handle. Okay. And so we dated, but we'd see each other every 3 weeks. I don't want a serious relationship. He says, good, I don't want a serious relationship. Like, this is just good. Like, I'm loving my career. He's got his career, and he proposes. And so it's like, well, now what are we going to do? We met when I'm living in New Jersey. He's working in DC. I take an assignment at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center down in Georgia. He takes one to California. Like I say, we're seeing each other every couple of weeks. And when he proposes, I'm like, all right, then, like, what are we going to do here? And I had taken a job then in Dallas, Texas. And it was friends of mine that said, usually people live in the same household when they get married. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know how that would work. And, loving my career, loving what I'm doing, and him as well. And I left, I left, and people thought I was either sick or pregnant or something happened bad, like, because law enforcement can be some doom and gloom stuff. And, I left, and I was like, I don't know how I can be successful in marriage with this 24/7 career, being married to somebody else with a 24/7 career. Like, I can't wrap my head around it. And I always loved leadership. So it really was having the courage to take a leap of faith. And Dave, I didn't know, like, I was moving 3,000 miles away from my closest friend or family member. I didn't know anybody in business. I didn't know anybody who opened a business. I didn't know how this was going to work out, but marriage was the thing that propelled me to take the leap of faith, because I thought I'd still be in law enforcement today.
Do you have more than 6 books?
I do. And I'm in the process of writing a book now that's a little unusual. So I was called to write this book. I was not looking to write this book. And I don't think I was looking to write any of my books, honestly. I think they all called me, but this one is actually all about how to run a business with a divine operating system. Most of the decisions that I make in life are, okay, God, where do you want me now? Okay, God, you want me there? Okay, I'll move there. All right, I'll quit that. Okay. And so how do you do that? And most people run a business very differently than I do. And so I have a colleague who asked about, would I consider putting it on paper, what I've done over the last 18 years to get this business and run it in, she calls it consciousness, I call it God, same thing. I'm not attached to whether or not people don't have to believe what I believe. I just, I call it the Holy Spirit. I say, she calls it consciousness, but to be able to be in this conversation. And so each book that's been given me has come from a place of somebody has said, oh, this is needed, and I feel this book has called me.
So that would be 7. How many books have you actually written now?
No, there are 7, and this would be
8. Yeah, I only saw 6 on your.
Yeah, there's one I don't really talk about.
Is that from high school?
No. It's just, it's not a, it's sort of like the evolution of who you are. I think that our thoughts and our beliefs, they shift and change, and so it's just not one that's relevant to the person I am today.
Yeah, no, I I tell people, I started writing my book in 2010, and it wasn't until 2020 that I actually finished it. And it really doesn't resemble the book that I started.
Right, exactly.
And thank God I didn't publish any of that stuff because
Well, but
it you do evolve.
exactly, and that's not a bad, like, it's not a bad thing. Like, it's not something where I'm like, oh, I'm ashamed and like we're hiding it or anything like that. It's not that. It's just it isn't going to help somebody forward, move forward quickly, which is the purpose of having the book anyway. And so, maybe at some point I'll take other ones down that they're not like, it's not that it's not that it's bad information. It's just, is there something more current? Like, one of my books we put out twice, like in the sense that there's a second edition, and it's because some of the research we used evolved. And so it's almost a disservice for people to read the old stuff, not because they're not going to get something out of it. So I think you're right. Like the one in 2010, like if you would have put it out, it probably would have been fabulous for 2010. But what would be fabulous for what you've learned from 2020? Maybe not, right? So
Yeah.
that's it.
And when your eighth book publishes, it'll be available on your website.
It will. It will. Yeah, and it'll be available on Amazon and on other places. This is my the woman that I'm writing this with, who actually reached out to me, is the journey of us even coming together is just such a crazy one. And so she's got more uh, uh, more ideas with that than I do.
What are the 7 pillars of leadership, and where does that come from? Where, I know that you've applied these things, but well, I'll just let you answer.
Well, Dave, the truth is, I wanted a shortcut. I shared with you, I didn't know anybody in business, and I didn't know, like, how am I going to have a business? How in the world is this going to work? Okay, I'm going to leave law enforcement. I'm going to have a business. That sounds great in theory, but like, what am I going to sell? And what, am I going to sell John Maxwell's leadership principles? Am I going to sell? And then it was like, no, I don't know what it takes to be successful in business. So I started to ask people. Same thing like the thesis. I went out and I asked people questions about the businesses that they had. I remember one woman who I still am in touch with, who sat down with me and she said, I got involved in leadership and I made the decision that every year I would buy one property, and after 20 years I have 20 properties. And I went, you could do that? Like, that's pretty cool. And so that goes back to that clarity. So these 7 pillars of leadership, that's where they came from. And it was because I wanted a shortcut in running my own business. But then it's what I ended up going out and companies ended up, I had 14 modules of leadership. They didn't want that. They wanted these 7 pillars that I had gone and done research on that were actually proven. And so they all start with a P. And so pillar number 1 is start with a written plan, understand the end in mind. So it's the plan. Number 2 is understand your personality. What hinders you, what helps you, what allows you to move forward, what's going to get in your way. Pillar number 3 is creating powerful partnerships. Everybody that I interviewed was really good at, once again, connection and having these partnerships that were often informal. Pillar number 4 is live your priority, understanding really, really, really what's your number 1 priority. You never have priorities. They don't exist. You have priority. You have one thing that's important to you. I've had clients who've missed their daughter's wedding because work was more important. Understand what it is and understand what the consequences are. That's what I got from all those interviews. Pillar number 5 is creating a meaningful and memorable presence. Presence was really one that came up over and over again in different ways. Being physically present, like we're dialed in, we're here, there's no distractions around me, being present. it also involved gratitude. People who were highly successful were grateful for everything, including the challenges. And the other thing was presence in terms of positioning, like how to position their presence, understanding what to say, who to say it to, when to say it, in order to be able to have whatever they wanted to lead in their companies and their organizations. 6 was progress, evaluate your progress, a constant state of evaluation. Am I really going where I'm supposed to go? Not being one of those organizations or people who does it once a year and goes, how did we get here? And 7, the last one, was investing in both personal and professional development. A lot of people invest in professional development, but they don't invest in personal development. I'm doing a retreat next week, a leadership retreat at my home. And, there are people coming, and we really get into, like, who are you? And not from a terms of like, I don't care about what happened to you 20 years ago. This isn't therapy, but it's like, who do you have to become? And that investing in personal development as well as professional development is really important. It's why I go away on retreats. So those are the 7, and that's all came from research, just me wanting a shortcut.
I'm looking at your website right now because I wanted to see which book you talk about those 7 pillars.
I don't talk about it in any of them.
What?
I don't talk about them in any of them. No, Dave, actually, I have a conference, my Upside Summit, and I spend 3 days diving into them in that conference. I do it once a year. I've done it 15 years. And it's when I talk about them the most, other than going into companies. Like I just did a presentation last week, but I haven't written about them. And I get asked that, and I was thinking I was going to do that before this book came up, but it just hasn't come up, and it might. But I have a conference I've done 15 years around these 7 pillars. So, it's when I talk about it.
I would imagine that there are bits and pieces of that in your books, though, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just not comprehensive, like all condensed down into one book. Yeah.
For those listening, what is the best way to connect with you if they want to enlist your services as a coach, a mentor, or to have you come to their organization to speak? I know you can get your books on your website or on Amazon, but to know which books are yours, go to your website so you can see them there. But is that the best way to connect with you? Is your website or a certain social media platform?
Yeah, I am so on my website, which is upsidethinking.com, UPSIDE, and the word thinking, THINKING.com. On there, you can, if you want to have a conversation, on the front page, there's actually a calendar link to be able to connect with me. And I happen to be on Facebook and LinkedIn. I'm not that complicated, but I'm really good to respond. And, I love connection. It's what it's the human part. So best place to find me on my website, and then social media channels.
For everybody listening, I will have the link to her website in the show notes. Definitely check her out. Check out her books. And I'm looking forward to another conversation with you. So thank you so much.
Dave, and the same, you have an incredible background, and the things that you've done, and the and what you've seen, it really has been an honor. I feel like we've known each other for a long time, and so being here is dialogue and conversation. And I hope that those listening feel like they were able to pull up a chair in the living room with us and just join in the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for listening to this episode of From Embers to Excellence. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Follow me on your favorite podcast platform, and visit hollenbachleadership.com for additional content. My goal is and always will be to add value to as many people as possible. So if I can be of any assistance to you or someone you know, please connect with me via email or on one of my social media accounts, linked on the homepage of my website. Remember, Our failures don't define us unless we let them, and the only true measure of a leader is the success of their team.